why don't we just jump into it? I'm going to, again, chairman's prerogative, jump around the agenda a little bit. We got a lot to do. But Tina, I'm going to let you start with your remarks first.
All right. One, again, thank you for all being here. I think this strategy board is crucial as we look and set up what the opportunity is for the future, how we set the tone, and what we can do together. So that's number one. As we think about the three greatest challenges that face our state, we have Helene, we have BEAD funding, we have to get connectivity that's affordable to all parts of every North Carolinian, because that sets the foundation from an education perspective, from a healthcare perspective for equitable access, to be able to access healthcare as needed, even virtual. So if you think about that as a foundation, that's what, number one, we have to get everywhere. Two, as you think about it, North Carolinians, wouldn't it be fun to have a nice portal website that everyone could go to? See, I'm getting lots of laughs, that everyone can go to, and it'd be effortless, and all of your information is in one spot, and you're not repeating it, and you're not trying to find things. So that's another big initiative that I would love to tackle, and also would love your help and assistance as we go through it, because user experience is going to matter, because we're going to try to meet the needs of everyone, whether they're 10 years old all the way up to 100 years old. So how do we do that in a way that's going to be effortless? So when you think about those two things, they're a big ask. And third, but certainly not last, is cybersecurity. Nefarious actors are coming after us fast and furious. So how do we ensure we are protecting the state's data? We're protecting our data to make sure everything is secure. So that's another big one as we come through and think through all the different things that we have access to. How do we make sure it's secure? So those are top of mind, the top three things that we're hitting right off and out of the gate to make sure it happens very effortlessly. I love to say that word. Sometimes execution is a little elusive, but we've got to get there. And so how do we do it? And together, how do we make sure we're hitting all of them?
All right, great. Before I jump into my remarks, I'd like to just kind of open up. I'm curious from each of you, to the extent you're willing to share and thought about this, what's your expectations for this board and serving on it? So I'm going to throw that open, and we're not going to go anywhere until we get a few comments. So don't be shy. And Joe, Gabe, Mike, anybody remotely, you're welcome to chime in, get our attention. If you'll kind of raise your hand electronically, Julie, we'll get that, or wave at us. But I really am curious to know. And, you know, we have two different perspectives, because we've got people that are new, have never served on the board. And we have people, Keith and I, that have been on since day one and have seen similar boards. So I'm just curious, expectations.
Can I qualify? Can I get a qualifying question?
Go.
So what are the expectations? Are the expectations of the board, or expectations of your role on the board?
The board.
The board.
Not your role.
Well, I mean, I'll start. Somebody asked me recently, what does the board do and what is the role of the board? And, you know, it's like the elevator speech.
Mm-hmm.
And it was I probably was a little unprepared for the question. But I explained to them, you know, working in its best way forward, the board represents the relationships between the state, the leaders of the state that support, deploy, execute, run IT, how those state entities consume IT, and how do we help legislature, how do we help leadership make decisions on where IT strategy should be invested in, directed towards. I probably spent a little bit more time in the elevator, but
All right.
I think our responsibility is to understand kind of what opportunities we have, and then how do we help support them in the best effective manner across all parts of government.
I like it. Others?
Yeah, I had her hand raised online.
Okay.
No, I raised my hand by mistake.
Oh, okay. It popped up. I'm watching.
Yeah, I'm watching too.
Yeah, you know, as we were going through the introductions, I'm really excited by the collective experience we bring here. as I look about, North Carolina, I get to travel a lot, and whenever I tell people that I'm from Cary, I can tell you 8 out of 10 times people have really positive, like, oh, wow, this is a great place, UNC, people talk about all of that. So as a proud North Carolinian, and I think as you can see with all the migration that's happening here, I think the collective experience of us, the wisdom, how can we bring to bear and be able to serve the citizens of North Carolina? And we all have experiences in different parts of our career. Like I come with a lot of private sector experience solving a lot of problems. So Tina, as you were talking about the portal, things like that, I think if this board can collectively, bring that wisdom and be able to help advance the cause of our citizens, make them, interacting with the government easier, whatever we can do, I think that's where I see the board playing a bigger role in terms of, advancing the lives of our citizens through the technology and IT.
Great.
Mr. Esparza does have something.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I think there's 3 things importantly. One, in support of my friend and colleague, Secretary Piccioni, on what the vision for IT strategy is across the state. I see this group as helping to execute on that vision across state government. And then because I know there are some folks around the table who come from the private sector as well, where we can facilitate healthy public-private partnerships in executing on that strategy, I think that is important work for us as well. Those 3 things.
All right. Any other comments?
I'd follow along those same lines. The idea of specifying objectives and that signify completion, getting to done, right? Having a 12-month plan and not so much a 10-year objective, being able to have deliverables that support the citizens and make that streamlined, possibility and actual reality.
Julie, will you throw up the slide deck? You don't mind, please? What I see today being primarily is kind of framing what we're going to do for the coming year. Will function significantly differently than we have in the past. We will also be meeting, just so everybody can set a tone, we're going to meet monthly. The intent is to meet here on a regular basis, but if you are in Boones, for example, where we have maybe a shorter agenda or even maybe a full agenda, it's fine. I'm totally comfortable personally with anybody jumping in virtually. Makes a lot of sense. There's no magic here. A lot of you seen this, but I just want you to get a sense of the ground rules. And not a big deal. Everybody's here, but we will start at 9 o'clock on the dot, and we won't wait for others to get here. Meeting will go on, and hopefully it'll be productive enough. Everybody will want to be here ready to go when we start. And we will make sure, just to know, meetings can go on even if we only have 2 people show up. We can't vote on things, and that's really the determination of why a quorum, right? I do love to set the tone because I do want this to be an interactive thing. This is not a lecture series by me or by Madam Secretary, not what we're here for. But there are stupid questions. And people say there's no stupid questions. No, there are, but we get the privilege of giving stupid answers if that we get them. So be prepared. The intent is that we enjoy doing this, though. This needs to be fun. IT is crazy as it sounds. It's a super career, super place to do. There's so much impact that we can have. The last thing I'm just going to make a note here is we'll get into certain items either because of time on a topic or the topic may not be germane for us either at all or maybe for later. And I'll use a device that we call, and some of you may be familiar with the parking lot. We'll make a note of stuff and we'll come back to it at the appropriate time. So what I'm going to do is kind of give a little background. We can go to the next one. Is I want us to get a sense, and it's going to take a little while to understand where the board has come, but also a little bit of the history of DIT in the state, and understand the relationship of DIT with the rest of the IT organizations around the state, because we are not the sole provider, if you will, and particularly at the application business analyst level. And we're going to need to interact across all of IT. So we got to figure out where we're going, how we get there. And as Patrick, I think you're very good. We're not here to worry about where we're going to be in 2040, but where we're going to be at the beginning of 2026 for right now. But everyone does always wonder, especially when you get a new leadership, new head of the ship, you know, do I have a job even? What is my job? What's going to be the roles directionally? And part of our responsibility is going to be help guiding that, advising that as we go and figuring that out, what the future is going to look like. I'll let you change. So you asked about, you know, the elevator message. One of my professors at Harvard, Marty Litsky, had what he referred to as question zero. And everybody should be able to answer question zero, either from your profession and career as well as at home. And it's nothing more than when somebody asks you, what do you do? You need to be able to answer that question. And like he always said, 7 to 10 words. So this is literally the elevator pitch. We'll work on this over time, and Madam Secretary may want to do that, but at least from the boards, this is the board's questions, their answer to question zero. What's our purpose? It's to provide advice and guidance to ensure excellence in our IT initiatives. And that advice and guidance first and foremost goes to the secretary and then to others that we interact with. And part of how do you get to purpose, I don't need to read to you these, but one of our responsibilities is going to be, that I think is really important, is how do we go from idea to actually execution? How do we implement things, get things done, accomplished? Will be very, very, very important. So, and then our goal is going to be to take action. I will subscribe generally. Jonathan's role is to keep me out of jail on this, but I tend to, in IT, and particularly at governmental bodies in the legislature, is seek forgiveness rather than permission as a general philosophy and roll forward. And we can talk about lots of examples and stories around that at some point. If we go on. So this is one thing that I find fascinating. This is from a study. There's something called Shift Happens. And they've been doing it for a number of years, but I don't need to read this to you, but you need to take a quick peek at it. And this is our challenge, and that's how fast we impact things, and they're moving around us, and how do we are the knowledge experts, if you will, for the end user. So here's my gig for all of us. We are the leadership for and representatives for IT across and around the state. And all of us, not just at this table, but the leadership within DIT and even a lot of the staff. And this is my favorite definition. Leadership's the ability to influence and persuade others in a common vision and direction. And that really is the ultimate charge of this board, right? And that's going to occur at different audiences that we have, whether it be with the governor's office, whether it's with a department like DOT or DPI and interacting with their IT folks. It's going to be the same thing we have with the legislature, because they control the purse, right? We need them to be nice to us and give us lots of money. So we have to figure out how to do that. And leadership is how we try to influence that outcome. A couple other attributes around this. Yep. These are other things Marty took. Now, I threw the picture in there because I thought you guys would appreciate that. The gentleman on the far right is Tom Ross, who was the president of the UNC system, was president of Davidson College before. Some of you know Scott Rawls, who was one of his predecessors, was the president of the community college system. There's a doppelganger of somebody that sort of looks like the current governor, and yours truly. All working together actually on education matters, and it's about relationships, and we're going to need to develop those. This is, though, one of the things I think is important to recognize for all of you. You've been leaders, you are leaders in your respective careers, professions, things that you bring to the board. But it's also, leadership is not a title. It is not a position. Just because they call you CEO or they call you judge doesn't make you necessarily a leader. Leadership happens by action. And that is something you can take on, we can take on. I expect all of us around this board to be leaders in and around the state relative to advancing the cause of IT. Well, this is something, when you get a chance, it's something we went through an exercise a while ago, and they said, okay, who are the leadership traits of people that you admire? Write them down, and then think about what those attributes are so you can emulate them, right? And so these are people, actually I've met all but 2 people on that slide I know pretty well. I don't know, I never met Gandhi. Wish I had. One of my favorite books. What's that? And then I never met Fred Rogers, but have great admiration for what he was doing, and not just the TV show, but the values that he was trying to do and instill and bring people together. But anyway, so that's an exercise to go through at some time. So with this, we go on. I want to talk about, and this is where we're going to get into a little bit of this, is I'm going to jump to the new business. We'll come back to the old business. They kind of overlap. These, if you take, and just take a minute, I'm not going to read these to you, but this is from a for-profit group called Board Effect. And I thought it's one of the better ones I've looked at, that here's the responsibilities that any board should have. And they generally apply. And to a large extent, they apply to us as well, right? So think about these as you read through them. And we'll get you copies of this. Again, I'm not going to read this to you. But it talks about, and one of these is number 9. We will have a public-facing role, and we'll get into over time, to be advocates for DIT, right? Is one of our responsibilities. We'll go to the next one. And 3 aspects, and you guys, this is not set in stone, and this is not the gospel according to Jeff. This is the things we all need to have input, guidance to, and direct. But I think one of the first one, and this one, you guys are going to have to kick me and remind me, we are a governance body, we are a board. We are not an implementation body. We are not to go run projects. We're not to say, this is what you're going to do. That's not what we're here for, right? That's your guys' job. To run the place, implement, make sure things get done. We're here as, and I know people in the past have hated this term, but it is part of our responsibility. We have an oversight responsibility to that. And I think it's important for us to recognize, at least my philosophy and view, it's not oversight in the terms of, oh, let's see who's missed something or wasn't correct. It's to be guidance because we have tons of experience sitting around this table. How do we lend that to help, if you will? And our goal, we should be, to the extent we can lean strategically, not tactically. Even though we're on a 1-year kind of looking at things, it's still primarily by strategic needs to be our focus. This pretty well describes us for a while as we get our feet under us as a new board. I always love this, that, you know, we're going to be out of the loop for a while as we figure things out and water settles. So I love the phone call where he says, no, I'm sorry, he's currently out of the loop. That's where I am a lot of the time. So moving on. This is where we need to pause for a moment. Hopefully everybody can see it online. But I'd love thoughts, directions, comments. This is the language, which we've got a copy of in your binder. These are the key powers, action items, responsibilities this board has been articulated by enabling legislation. These are the things we are supposed to be doing. We've done those to varying degrees over the past few years, or to no degree in some cases. And that's just me being me. I'm going to be the Tom Brady, criticizing us and the officials sometimes on the field. And then, you know, you guys can throw stuff at me. I'm old enough and can take it. So spend a few minutes. Is there parts of this that you guys feel like, yes, that's more of what we should be focused on, where we need to be, we're comfortable across the board? Because part of this conversation we're going to get into, I want to talk about introducing, we have 2 standing committees. We'll get into this in a little bit. I want to discuss adding 2 more. So we would have 4 standing committees. Another thing that I envision us doing over the course of this year is creating work groups where the DIT has priorities and needs, and we have the authority to draw in outside resources and expertises to help and leverage that where we can, and helping the DIT get their stuff done at a strategic level. I'm not talking about hiring project people and that sort of thing. So it's strategy issues, technology planning. There's things around when we talk about developing the strategic systems plan and a 5-year tech plan. Now we're not going to set and write the strategic systems plan for the state of North Carolina. None of us, because we're volunteers. At least I don't have the time to do that. And I assume none of us do. But we have a responsibility to review it and ensure that that as a task is getting done. One of the things, as an example, will be, which we'll talk about, is a horizontal strategic information systems plan. We've got like 30 plus department agencies that create their own strategic plan, plus the statewide. We need to make sure we don't have conflicts in that. We can help with that review and process as well. We talked about AI and some of the things that we need to do there, and we can be a catalyst for evaluating vendors and things that can be shared, done by the departments themselves, but making sure it's shared across all agencies. So thoughts, comments, reactions to what's that's right out of the legislation. So I tried to stay fairly true to the language.
Well, I think AI is going to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the legislature is doing or thinking about with AI, but I'm sure it's something. So I think either we are going to be reacting to whatever they put out, or we're advising to it. So hopefully we find ourselves in a position that we're advising around AI.
And one of the thoughts, well, let's come back. We'll come back to that AI and the legislature. Okay, we'll make a note of that and come back to it.
But to your point, Jeff, about the work groups, I think one of the things that would be helpful as it feeds this, feeds the process is we had 2 official subcommittees, but we did not and have not executed those, those specific work groups that could move things forward or help move things forward. I think that's a good change, an opportunity for change.
And this 2 really have been digital transformation and the cybersecurity and privacy, right?
Yep.
So, and they've kind of become permanent work groups, if you will, or subcommittees, but Madam Secretary?
I think too, when you think about develop and maintain a 5-year business systems tech plan, and I don't mean to laugh at this, but technology changes
We saw, right?
Right, and so I think we have to think a bit differently. So yes, we have to create it, but we also have to say, here's what we feel we should prioritize with funding for these things that are going to be the most important upfront. And then we can look towards the later years for what could or could not change, because we don't know what that looks like yet. So as much as we want to guess the future, I think we have to bend ourselves to that reality of, here's what we can do for the right now state plan. Here's what we can do in the next 1 to 2 years, but 5 years is a stretch.
Just thought you knew all those answers.
I wish.
As an example, especially those that have been out in business, law practice, whatever, how many of your organizations currently have a 5-year either business plan or, more importantly, a 5-year technology plan? Anybody? No. And so here's another piece of the puzzle to throw at you guys, not to solve, but we need to interact or understand, Jonathan and Dylan, are there tweaks even to the legislation and to the bylaws, so they're not asking for us to do something that the check mark goes, well, they're not doing this, so let's just not use this, or they're obviously not doing what we ask them, so we're not going to give them any more money to do other things. So being in sync and in line with reasonable expectations, because people aren't doing 5-year business plans anymore, right? That was a very good point. So other things from this. Keith, you had a comment?
Well, no, you just touched on it. I think it's a very important piece. the effort does need to be at all levels, inclusive of legislature, right? So there's a lot of language that we execute to within the state. We're obligated to execute, and I think there needs to be an effort around how do we modernize that language in support of IT strategy. And I think that would go a long way to not only help the legislature understand how fast technology changes and how we can actually execute, but it also changes the way DIT and the agencies can support their IT strategy needs with supporting legislature. If we only do one part and not the other, we're going to still fight that battle.
Sure.
But I'd say there's one in conjunction with what you said, and that's education. Not everyone in the legislative branches understand technology and the power of it, the utilization of it, and the cybersecurity of it, to be honest. And I think this group needs to really think through how we can help educate, because it's not just me and my office, it is you as well. How do we help educate on, back to Jeff, your point, the quick changes in technology, but even what the art of possible is now and what we can do and what that can look like. But it's a lot of education, because you brought up AI. AI has actually been around for a very long time.
Coined in 1956.
That's correct. And when you think about it, whoever recoined it, I wish I had, thought of it. But my point is, it's been around for a long time. People don't realize they're actually utilizing it to this day. So helping explain when you pull up your phone and you use maps, or when you have autocorrect on your typing, all of that goes to AI. And I think part of the misconception is it's something scary versus it's already being utilized. So helping educate, we need a team to help really with what that looks like from a legislative standpoint that can really make an impact on how we can help influence them going forward on everything else. Because if they don't have a baseline education, it doesn't matter what we bring them, it's not going to resonate.
And we'll have a bigger challenge interacting. I think we have, and you guys can chime in and add, externally we have for sure two primary audiences, one being the governor's office. I mean, we are a function under him and he'll have priorities. And how do we use technology to facilitate and advance his agenda? That's kind of one of our charges. The other is, though, we are a creation of the General Assembly and they control the purse strings. We also have a bigger challenge. There's 170 members in the General Assembly, and I can count on one hand and have extra fingers left who actually have any comprehension detail-wise of IT. I may be willing to bet lunch at Chick-fil-A that there's probably no current member, maybe one or I can think of, that could actually write code, could program something. Very few, it'd be in C or something, but not too many assembler programmers left or COBOL programmers. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, everybody on the board. From an office standpoint, one of the things that I would really hope that this board and the DIT can help with are a couple of things. One is, and this exists. I don't know who's here representing President Hans. Oh, you are? Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So at the university level, I've spent time at the university level.
Former board chair of the UNC trustees.
Yeah. And there's a siloization that exists across a lot of units of government. And from an office standpoint, just the office of the state auditor, there are certain things that are generic to daily life. Microsoft Office Word, for example, those types of enterprise software applications, Zoom, WebEx, those type of things. And, we're taking a deep dive as we analyze our office coming in. Be helpful, I think, to have a statewide strategy for simple enterprise utilization, because there's no proprietary or sort of uniqueness to Microsoft Word at the state auditor's office or at Appalachian State, right? So it seemed to me from an efficiency standpoint, it would be very helpful, even as independently elected council of state members. I don't think there's going to be anybody who objects to being more efficient with the simple day-to-day operation of enterprise systems. And then the second thing that I think would be extremely helpful from an efficiency and budgetary standpoint across government agencies is data storage and how we store our data. One way to store the data would be very helpful, and each agency, like our office, for example, we have certain pieces of information that aren't public and that we use in auditing work papers that we're not going to share unless it's necessary, right? And the Attorney General certainly has those types of documents and work papers as well. I'm sure the governor has a slew of them too. But those data storage solutions can silo that, and maybe we can be more efficient in terms of how we spend money to accomplish our goal to store data. And then the third point from the auditor's office specific, what I'm hoping for is for DIT to help us obtain data quicker. I have had feedback from our team that some of the completions of financial audits and performance audits are slowed up by the waiting for data. And pursuant to, and again, I'm speaking auditor office specific, pursuant to our authorities, everybody's supposed to give us the data. And we're looking for software solutions also to go out and grab the data as opposed to waiting for it to be to trickle down or be delivered, right? But it would be very helpful to have a strategy where we can cooperatively, have that data share so that I can have an auditor team that's more productive and they're not waiting, for data, for example. Those are three observations that I wanted to bring to the table from the auditor's office, and I hope that's helpful.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate those, and we're on the same page on how it's got to take a plan on how to do it, and then we'll need other agencies to allow us to be able to be on similar platforms for that consistency to be able to do it. So
our office will be cooperative.
Thank you.
And, I think it would help from a budgetary standpoint. Certainly, we will share our load of the budgetary requirement for data storage and enterprise solutions, but these basic solutions seem to be something, and the chairman and I have actually talked a little bit about that. If DIT wants me to go audit all the contracts, we're glad to put a team on that and maybe give you some feedback, but it would be helpful if we could sort of maybe corral that at some point in the near future. And I think the legislature, particularly the Legislative Oversight Committee that this board reports to, would be extremely happy with a cooperative note on trying to be more efficient on these solutions.
Thank you. So I'm gonna pause here. It's good. We're starting to capture some key areas that we're gonna spend time on over the coming year. Quick review of logistics. Once a month, everybody comfortable doing that, and basically more or less having it in person. We're targeting, this is a little unusual, but we're going to target the 4th Friday of each month, same time, so you can just book it as, is everybody good with that? Mm-hmm. Just as FYI, heads up, set it in front of everybody and God so you can hear it. I will be gone in March. Keith will be leading that meeting as our vice chair. So I will be out of, not just pocket, I'll be out of country. So I will be gone.
You will have a bunch of to-dos when you get back.
Always a mistake, right? Okay, so that's it. Communication-wise, one of the things, again, taking care of some admin work in the middle. We have had in the past assigned .gov email addresses. I throw it open to I have had one, I never activated or used it. So the thought is, but we weren't meeting that frequently. We weren't using that many pieces of information or documents to share where we could have a share file. There's things we could access that way. You can keep from communication wise, doesn't have to intermingle with your private emails or work emails if we keep them separate. Recognize just as a point of information, there's things that we cover. We're in a public meeting, but if side conversations, work groups, committees, you're working and you think some of that is private that you put on if you go to your private email or your private phone number, it absolutely is not. It is searchable under FOIA, it's searchable under legal stuff. So just because you take and put it in a personal sphere doesn't make it private or not accessible to people literally. You just need to understand that. As I had one senator once told me who was never on email, had never been on email his entire life. He's no longer with us, he's passed away. But as he described, a phone conversation that's not recorded, meeting, is communication and information sharing. An email is evidence. So that's how he described it. So anyway, so the question becomes, is anybody got a bias or any guidance from staff? Should we be using .gov? Do we just stay in our personal sphere? Have we been doing it? Any preference, bias? Does it make a difference?
I can tell you that legally, the strong preference to have everyone switch to a .gov email account.
Okay.
I mean, because the problems will arise. Essentially, to say in a sentence, what you do is the public's business as it relates to this board, and the public is entitled to see your emails and your communications. So if we were to get, let's say, a public records request from the News and Observer, it would be to Google for your Gmail as it relates to or your business or whatnot. So it's easier to just avoid that. Mm-hmm. And I would like to add something that I remember years ago when my dad saw me feverishly texting, or something 20 years ago. He said, these devices, you can enter like 9 numbers in them and actually hear a live human being on the other side. And it's far more technologically advanced than like Morse code or whatever that we're doing. So pick up the phone and call people when in doubt. It's also easier. But .gov emails, and we can actually have someone, I think, probably as early as the next meeting to have everyone understand how they work. It's very simple. You can log in through Office365.com and access your .gov email. So it's one more thing to check, but it's just easy.
Well, then if we exclusively use that as the venue for our communications, then you can represent that if we are asked for, and then they don't have to necessarily go checking.
As our chair, I don't know if that was a proposal to do this, but I would say if it is a proposal, I would second it, especially if the intent of the board has become more engaged. It gives us more capability to sync digitally as well. Having distributed communications, emails, things get lost, right? And so if we can get on the same page with that communication, it also gives us the ability to create, you said share file, but repository of information that's associated with that account. We all know where to go now versus whether or not people are tuning in.
Great. Other comments about it? Julie?
I just want to point out, in the past, several board members have, even though they had .gov accounts, declined to use them and said,
Guilty.
Either, I can't keep up with the meetings because I'm not checking this email. Can you send it to my executive assistant? So it would require a commitment of the board members to actively use the .gov email account.
I think there's a hybrid that we could send meeting invites to your normal email so that it's front and center, and then in the meeting invite say go check, or there's documentation in SharePoint or something so that you can.
I like that. Because I don't know if I'd just organically be checking a .gov email address. I got enough to deal with my App State one.
So any other comments or suggestions now? Because the other thing is you can add the .gov email into your email thread. So it will pop up, it will populate that box, but it'll also show up with all your other emails. So it'll come top of view. So any thought, any other discussion around it? Because what I'm going to ask is, I'll ask for, I think on this, we need a motion and a vote, mainly so we document that we're committed to doing this. And what I'd like the motion to contain is that will be our mode of communication and noticing to people. And we're going to have to use it. If you start, you know that's where you're going to get it, you're going to have to check it and start using it. Otherwise you will, like I say you all, I will default and quit using it unless you make me. And I didn't want to dictate this, because you all ignore me anyway, like my kids do. So the idea is I'd like this to be owned, that we're all stepping up and agreeing if this is what we should do.
Fine with me.
So I need a motion.
So moved.
So we have,
If I may,
go ahead, comment.
one of the things, just for the simplicity, I agree with what you're saying. For the simplicity's sake, with so many people around and everybody's email cannot be remembered, and also your suggestion about work group creation, multiple work groups. So would it be possible to create groups?
Distribution groups.
For the distribution groups, such that it would be easier for us to even have their own private emails also built into that? I mean, just a suggestion.
I don't know if I would probably put private in the distribution list, but I think we could create distribution lists either of, because like who's on the digital transformation can be a distribution, the cybersecurity committee, subcommittee can be a distribution, and the whole board can be. And we can actually include that in two levels. It can be just the board members, and it can also be the board members and staff. So it's a broader distribution. There's a couple ways we can frame that for ease of communication and helping, and getting the IT folks to help set that up for us. So I have a motion on the floor from Keith to have us issue .gov email addresses, and it will become our primary source of communication electronically, and that we will then create appropriate distribution lists as necessary. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then let the record show it was unanimously approved. So we will hopefully get those taken care of by the appropriate group. Okay, so any other things that we need to address from a logistics, communication? Am I missing anything? All right, so moving right back into what we were talking about. So we kind of know the powers and duties to do. We'll, in future meetings and in between, we're going to go through that and carve out the things that we actually need to be working on and working towards. One of the things on a communications level want to talk about is who we're communicating to and frequency. One of the things we've traditionally done is we've left that completely in Dylan's lap for DIT, and that's your function and responsibility as the legislative liaison for the agency and the department. But we are going to need to have the ability to communicate as a board as well. We can leverage into Dylan, but there's, as I mentioned before, I think we have two audiences we have a responsibility to communicate with day to day, and then kind of running things by the secretary so we don't surprise you. Surprises are usually not good.
Yeah, I don't like surprises.
Going to your boss. But I think we have a responsibility to develop a relationship and communicate with the governor's office. We also have the same responsibility that will help us if we start developing regular communications and interacting with the General Assembly. And that said, and we're not going to decide this today. And this is not like, let's agree, you've heard this for 2 minutes. I want this to, percolate, if you will. I want you guys to think about it, and we'll decide at the next meeting, but I don't want to go too far down the pathway where how do we communicate first and foremost with the General Assembly, because we are supposed to be communicating on these things to them. In a sense, that really is our boss. Much like the university system, most people don't realize the university system is not part of the executive branch, but part of the legislative branch, interestingly enough. But that said, so I'm looking for ways to communicate. Part of that, and I don't know how we do this, so give some thought, but I think we need to start attending the IT joint oversight committees, where they recognize we're board members, we're IT staff, DIT, and they know who we are when they need questions asked, research done, or information what we're working on, and we can be advocates. The other aspect of that is we need to, which I think we should work towards, is that we're presenting at least quarterly to that body. That we're sitting down with some kind of update and stuff, so it's not once a year, they get us for 10 minutes, and they go, ooh, good. That work, because what happens for legislatures, out of sight, out of mind, who's in my office, who's got the 6-point bullet list and the need, right? That's what gets their attention generally. So we need to do that. Now, the other group from the legislative side that we need to develop deep relationships with are going to be the big chairs, the big budget chairs. There's multiple in the House. There's 3 in the Senate. It's Brent Jackson, Ralph Heiss, and Mike Lee in the Senate. I know that because I come from that side of the House. And one of the things that is out and about, which I did have, everybody can pull down, is a list of all the chairs of all the different committees. And particularly the budget chairs are going to be critical for us. So developing that relationship, because that's where the ask happens. And they have the authority beside the President Pro Tem and the Speaker. So Senator Berger and Representative Hall wield unbelievable authority and control piles of money individually, not just collectively through the votes. The budget chairs have a big deal. We're going to come back to the budget in a second. One of the things I want us to think about is being sponsors of creating what, and you may be familiar, there's a number of caucuses that exist within the legislature. And we used to have a tech caucus way back, kind of went by its wayside. And the caucus, I see we title it, and this is kind of inside baseball. We joke about this, but it's semi-serious. When we ran a bill, somehow we put jobs in the title, or that the main function of the bill was jobs creation. May not have done it, but it's hard to say no to something that's creating jobs for a legislator. I don't know why that is. So same thing here. We need a caucus, but we need something that's a hook that everybody's interested in, and it will be a tech caucus that we will obviously be able to communicate across multiple topics. But I'm thinking, and we're not going to decide this today, we can have some conversation, but we're definitely going to talk about it next meeting. I want us to consider or think about calling it the AI caucus. Because AI's got everybody's attention, they know it's important, we know we're going to need funds, and that opens the door. And I think what happens in caucuses, members join, self-select which caucuses they want to participate in. Might be a transportation caucus, might be a sportsman caucus, whatever the different topics. But I think if we create an AI caucus, we're much more likely to have people self-select because they want to hear what's going on, what's the latest, greatest, what are we doing? Because they're dealing with it to some extent themselves, but all of the other agencies. So I think that gives us a framework to interact. Within that body where we get guidance, and it's sort of an unofficial work group, is we're going to need the key people who's dealing with AI out of DIT, if you will. But I can see engaging NC Tech as well to help facilitate that. You know, they have over 600 IT firms and organizations, most of the universities participate, and they can give us resources to help coordinate those things. And those are typically once a month events that they do, or they're doing presentations to the members, whatever. We go on, you know, basically field trips, you know, to go see something in use, site visits, if you will. From the commercial side of the world. So I want us to think about leveraging what's typically been historically used to start building those relationships. And then that becomes a point we can use. Gabe, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so Jeff, I appreciate this discussion, and what I'm hearing is both the frequency of interaction with the legislature as well as the content of what those interactions might look like. And I would simply ask out loud, and perhaps again ask my colleague, Secretary Piccioni, to jump in, how you would distinguish the frequency and content of what this board's interactions with the legislature are versus those of us literally in the executive branch, Secretary Piccioni and myself, her or myself, testifying before or interacting with the legislature in any capacity. How would you distinguish between the frequency and content of this board's interactions and our interactions with them?
Good call.
That's a great question.
Great
And
question.
I'll even add a third one. Whatever else the governor is going to have as either advisory and or committees that he is already in the process of doing, that we need to ensure that that runs in its own lane and we don't interfere with that.
And I would think, you guys correct me, I don't know if this board needs, our direct conduit to the governor, besides everybody picking up the phone and calling Josh, is really through your office. Needs to be all of that, I believe, and we can talk about what we may be communicating with the legislature is that responsibility. That will also be important that we're updating. We're not going off on our own ever. That stuff, I envision you doing a pre-read, for lack of a better way to describe it, and yeah, that's good. That doesn't conflict with anything we've got going, or governor may have in other areas, right? But I see you being the primary conduit to the governor. I don't see us, and you guys can correct me, I don't see us trying, there's no caucus with the governor, right? And that relationship exists basically at the cabinet level.
Perfect. And you'll find Secretary Gabe and I will be also, we are tied at the hip. So that's one thing to know, is this cabinet is probably acting a bit different than other cabinets, and that we pick up the phone and call each other all the time. And so that way, anything that's running through, we'll make sure that it isn't interfering with anything else that anyone else is doing from any other agency that could be in conflict, or that someone's doing that I need to bring back and tell this group as well. So you'll find it's going to run both ways on that.
And this is jumping out of the, kind of, it impacts the board a little bit. This is more commentary, so taking off chair hat for 2 seconds. I think that's one of the things I tip my hat to the governor. Looking at the secretaries that have been selected and appointed, they, as a general rule, this may not be across the board apply, but I don't view them as, sometimes in the history, they've been political appointments. And it is a political appointment, but not literally, I'm taking care of a friend who has no clue what this agency does or how it operates, but they're going to be the head of it, versus professional hires into those roles. And that's one of the things you bring. I'm still not sure how he convinced you to leave Google, but hey, I love it. We'll
There are
take
days
it.
I'm still questioning too.
All right, so that said, those are stuff that becomes like kind of a quasi subcommittee, like the AI caucus would be something we would do communications and stuff. We know some of the things I've written down and around that we'll talk about work groups, perhaps, and these are things we need to identify where, because we can't tackle everything, especially at the board level, right? And where we will, and work groups, I see us going outside for help, to help us staff with somebody from DIT, a board member at a minimum has to be. That's also a point of information. If we create any work groups, it has to have at least one board member as part of that work group. It can't just, we go assign people and they go do stuff. If we're doing that, then we're outside our sphere of responsibility, okay? So everybody's got to keep that in mind. But things I see us potentially tackling, once we get partial concurrence amongst the board members, this is where, Mr. Auditor, your guidance will be important, and Madam Secretary, your guidance. So as we create work groups. One, we know there's issues around procurement. There's great things and effort being done in that area, but there is tremendous opportunity as well, right? So procurement might be an area we say, yeah, we'll help give credence to, guidance to, advice to. AI is clearly one we've been talking about for a while. I see AI not being a work group, I see it being one of the 2 additional standing committees we have potentially. So we have digital transformation, we have cybersecurity and privacy, a third potentially for us to consider, not today, not to vote on today, and that's something the board will decide, is are we going to have an AI standing committee? The next is, I guess this kind of falls out. There'll be issues. And the question is, do we try, this is where we'll need guidance from staff, and we're going to need guidance, thoughts as the board, because I don't know the answer to this as an example. We have a peculiar issue that's been going on forever, as long as I know, 20 plus years, is the ability to facilitate even the audits and the CAFRs that are done annually required by the state auditor's office. That we can't get an accurate number of the IT spend across the state and all departments, because DIT is not the only place spending dollars. Yeah. And I say this based on experience in 2018, so it's getting a little long in the tooth, but I went around when I was in the Senate trying to collect and tabulate what the IT spend is for the state. My guess today, we're well over $3 billion spent. That's not what it shows when you look at DIT. You don't have a $3 billion budget. But I guarantee you we're spending more than that. But it's important to understand what that spend is. If nothing more, I think, Mr. Auditor, you bring it up excellent. There are common things like PCs, enterprise software, whether it's Microsoft, that we're not taking advantage of all the discounts that may exist. Which gives us better, a governmental discount or an educational discount? And how do we leverage that across the buy? But the balance to that, which will be a challenge for us, is how do we not, it's finding the balance that we have the proper controls so we don't have people going off and doing crazy things, not taking advantage of discounts, but not taking 4 years to get approval for a PC, right? That's why people, because they got work to get done. So we've got to figure, we can provide insight and guidance.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other thing too is we have to ensure our Secretary of DOA is primary with us in helping us through that and procurement, because there's 2 pieces to that. So I just want to make sure that as we think through it, he is front and center on that as well with me. We are in lockstep partnership on it is something to be solved. Together as we start looking through this, of course, with the auditor's office as well.
Now, this is something, and Gabe, if you'll follow along, and Mike, particularly your interest in this, can you throw up continue with the slides for a second? This is an area where traditionally we've stayed out of. We may want to continue to stay out of. But I'm going to challenge this thing about, we'll go past, okay, for just a second, if you go back, sorry. These are things I just want us to think about. We have a responsibility to the plan. We have a responsibility to ensure we're getting top priorities done. We actually have a responsibility if things are struggling, going off the rail. If we have another NC Tracks where we have a $400 million overrun, we know about it before or during the fact, at least not after the fact, right? That is a responsibility we need to figure out how to take on. Setting priorities that are at the board level and helping participate in the plan. One thing, the comment I want to make on the day-to-day is while we're doing this, we have, I think, 2 responsibilities. You guys can kick me if you disagree or comment differently. The day-to-day, we do not need to be in the middle of. That's not our role or responsibility. But it is our responsibility not to do things that screw up the day-to-day operations of DIT, right? We don't need to make their life more difficult. We're here to help, not mess things up, if that's a fair way to say it, if everybody's comfortable with that. So we need to keep that in mind as we're making. Rocks and monuments, we'll learn over time, but I would like us to understand those things. They help us. And rocks and monuments are the things that they're not moving, they're not changing. We're not going to change the ERP system again for the state. We just did that a few years ago. Whatever those are, we're not going to tomorrow have one single CIO across all agencies. They're all going to continue to have a CIO, right? So there's things we're going to have to figure out how to navigate to optimize because we don't have the ability to change it, right? we're gonna have to figure out our priorities, oversimplified. And this is where I want you guys to think about between now and halfway to the next meeting. And we'll get guidance from DIT, we'll get guidance from other agencies, because that's another thing on the communication I want to come back to, is what are the 2 or 3 things we're going to focus on? Because there's probably a list of 50 things, and it's completely unrealistic to think we can lend credence or weight behind all of those. So let's pick a couple things and demonstrate we can get things done. While meeting the objectives that the legislature has charged us with doing, right? So.
And how it plugs into the work group.
Right. Plans out the wazoo. We know that it's going to exist. We're going to have to understand these kinds of things as a group. So there's going to be homework that you will have. That's one thing if you've stepped up to. So you got to be prepared for a little homework or staff that can help do the homework and give you a summary. Okay? We'll go on. Okay, just common code funds is my thing. Budget, sometimes you operate on a small budget. I'll throw this out as a personal note. That's actually my honeymoon, and which people won't realize. My wife is between her sophomore and junior year. I just graduated, started with IBM, and we didn't have 2 nickels, literally, as you can tell. So that's where I spent my honeymoon. All right, go on.
You had a lot of hair.
And I had hair then. Okay. So here's a point. Take a peek at these, and I'll share these with you. To what degree? That's the question. And it may be 0, it may be high. To what degree do we engage in the budget for DIT? And recognize, and how well do we need to understand the budget? I mean, 60% of the budget, 58%, goes to education. Most citizens don't know that. So when they want more roads, more bridges, more, what have you. There's limits to that. So I totally believe this. I want us to, we're going to need to maybe tackle this. If we understand the budget, that's how we get things done. Because he who controls the budget controls the priorities. And looking at the budgets will also signal priorities. And we need to understand that and have that information shared with the board. And we have two sources of the budget, state budget. The governor creates one, and the legislature creates one, right? The budget for the governor will be aspirational in the sense it's the priorities that office focuses on. But the reality is, whether we like it or not, the priorities that get implemented are those that are in the legislature, because that gets appropriated and that can be money that can be spent. So it becomes very important. Our role is to understand what the asks are going to be and in front enough in the process with the right people that will actually embed that ask and those monies in the budget for our utilization. So we're going to have a challenge to how do we educate the members on priorities. As an example, recurring funds for cybersecurity. It's the classic, when nothing's happening, they assume everything's fine and they don't want to give you anymore because they think everything's great. So something bad happens and then it's somewhat too late, right? I will tell you that 7 and 8 are important for us to understand as we interact with the legislative body. Budget predictability is, I will tell you, even though they may not articulate it, is the single #1 priority of every elected official in the legislature. They don't like surprises. They don't like overruns. So our ability to be accurate in our ask and utilization will allow us to do number 8. If we come back and say, we're going to do this for X amount, if we do that, we stay on budget, stay on time frames, we have earned the right to ask for more because they will believe we can deliver and we're serious. So one of the things we're going to need to help as a board is have an appreciation for that and the ask when we're going to the legislature. All right, go back. Keep going. So again, this is, we're dealing with technology and we think this is, bits and bytes and CPUs and integrated circuits and chips, but it's not. This is still people. We're dealing with people. It's a people process. Governance is messy and we make it messier because it's people trying to do this. So we need to think through this as we're going forward. Anybody know what that is? Anybody know how to multiply? It's a slide rule. I actually owned one that was my father-in-law's. I couldn't tell you how to use it if my life depended on it. But things that I want us to articulate in here, if you go to the next slide. Oh, this is a piece of information for us. This is what we're talking about, the change, the pace. Take a gander at this.
They also indicated that with AI, this is around compute, right?
Yes.
Fundamentally, it's around compute, but with AI, it's gonna.
Exponential.
It's no longer even this fast, it's faster.
Yeah, so just tell them you don't need to go to class because it's out of date before you start your course. All right, going to the next slide. So these are things, and I don't know what will be on the list, but I'm throwing these out. They're things I know are being tackled in different departments around the state, or things that have been talked about. One of the things is a concept Madam Secretary referred to is having access and doing business through everything here. There's a couple states, Colorado, Texas. They're doing something called My Colorado, My Texas. Do we do My North Carolina, as an example? But what kind of functions do we do here? We're not going to go through this, but what I'd like you to do is we need to think about priorities, what needs to be on this list, and then prioritize it, and what are the appropriate things for us as a board to engage and get in the middle of trying to advance.
Before you go forward, I think there's even a more fundamental piece too. And
Okay.
that is the how, right? So the rules of engagement, when we look at budgets, when we look at procurement, when we look at all of those elements rolled into what's innovation, the state isn't positioned very well to innovate. We have to go out and we have to basically develop a plan to spend money to then spend and implement that to understand whether or not we can innovate. It's almost backwards. The state needs to develop a method of innovation. And if you go to the private sector, we've got plenty of private sector folks here, companies that develop products that generate revenue, that generate profit, invest in innovation that is a throwaway. It's considered a sunk cost into that revenue stream. There are limits, but you learn through those innovation cycles to create better, more cost-efficient, functional, and profitable widgets. The state doesn't have a mechanism to do that. And so if we really want to move forward with technology modernization and innovation, the state needs to change the way we think about how we innovate. Because today, we just buy the next product. We really don't evaluate what the next product or the modernization is.
Well, that's actually not 100% true. We do have NC Innovation, and we do have a university system that.
NC Innovation is
So we do have-
new, so we have to
we
take
do have
advantage of
the
that.
ability to innovate.
So one of the things I'll throw at this group is, I'd love for somebody, and we don't have to, again, decide right now, but comment back offline to Madam Secretary or myself, if somebody present and educate us, and it's gonna take help from, where are we in the innovation? What exists? What needs to change process-wise to leverage it? It wasn't long ago, we had an innovation lab, right? We had vendors coming in the sandbox, we could play with stuff. It's another area that we could use the innovation concept and lab and investment, also engage the legislators and the governor's office so they understand what's possible, right? And then also, where does it overlap? How do we use the question we got to keep asking ourselves as a board? What do we get behind and support to hit a priority where technology is an enabler to advance that getting done, right? So there's simple things. As one process that's going on that I'm aware of is that the Secretary of State's office is working on eliminating wet signatures, which has an identity management and authentication and authorization levels that we have to deal with. How do we facilitate support that? Is it a statewide priority? Probably. And then where does that go and how do we advocate or get resources to accelerate it beyond, right? As one example. And there's fundamental things, because we're talking about innovating. Do we really have a well-documented enterprise architecture that everybody's bought into at all the other agencies? so we don't build Chinese railroads, right? How many different identity management solutions are floating around being used? Is that the best use of synchronization of data across and data sharing? So anyway, there's those kinds of things and other issues we should, but I think if somebody could own, I would love to educate us where we are on leveraging innovation in the state. Because I know there's agencies, individual departments that are doing stuff in that category, and it may be as simple as understanding that in a little more detail and how do we broaden that, support them from our side. So, all right, going on. This is just inside. You're getting a lot of stuff from me, and I apologize. But again, this is kind of framing for us today. But if I'd like us to try to be able to have data as our source of support in the decisions that we make as a board. I mean, there'll be opinions, there'll be gut views, there's experience. These are questions that a number of legislators use to decide to vote or not vote for and support a piece of legislation. And they're going to ask, and when we're taking something to the legislature, we need to be prepared to have the answers to these types of things when we're asking for something. And it makes, believe it or not, almost all of them will look at this, and it makes a difference when they're making a decision. So we can stick that away and be aware. Now, I love the comment. You guys notice the source. It was one of my favorite all-time quotes in a committee when we were asking what was the recommendation based on? What was your input? It's classic. And at first it seems silly or goofy, makes no sense, right? But when you think about it for a while, it's kind of like the note said, it's what not there.
Right.
And it actually is a valid answer.
So can I recommend that we have Keith perhaps talk about you talk about what colleges are doing for innovation and do a brief presentation at the next session.
Great.
And my team talk about where we are on some of these things so that you also see what direction we're headed. So that way, as we look at a data-driven decision, where we have the gaps.
So one of the thoughts that I'll throw out as a desire, this is me sitting in this seat, is that every meeting we have some topic that's presented by either board member, DIT. It's something that's a 10 to 15 minute presentation, and then we'll set aside the same time so we can ask questions and unfold it and get into the details. And it should be something topical that we're dealing with, whether it's review of the priorities, where you present, here's the 3 things I need the board's help and we need to delve in. Or we're talking about setting up a caucus. What would that look like? Who's participating in that? We do need to think about work groups. We need to come back. What are the work groups that we want to consider putting in place that a board member has to have one that's championing, owning it, and then think about what would be the resources we would need to tackle that, either primarily from DIT, but I do, and I'm real comfortable, we're going to go outside and pull vendors and people that can help us, that have deep content expertise that we can lean into. So that's a thought. All right, going on. All right, we'll save these for later. These are just the list of my favorite, over 40 years of working in this industry, my favorite pieces of advice. Communications. Anybody, any group we're forgetting or leaving out? We need to think about the legislators, governor's office, board members, DIT. Oh, go ahead, because I do have one thought.
Well, you made a comment earlier, and I made a little asterisk to myself. So I know the secretary is well connected with the agency CIOs, and you mentioned cabinet. How well do the agency CIOs that are developing their own strategy plans know the board?
Perfect, that's exactly.
You owe me lunch.
I know. Slip you the $5 I asked if you'd raise that question. So the thought here, and that was exactly what was, how are we going to communicate with the CIOs of the other eight? I don't know if you have a formal meetings. One of the things we did years ago, I held a breakfast every other week. This gentleman knows about them. We had the CIOs of the 5 largest agencies, HHS, DOR, DOT, et cetera, state CIO, and legislators. And we had breakfast every other week. And it was just, it wasn't, no agenda. It's just share what's going on, what you're working on, what am I working on. It was an informal way to exchange. One of the other committees, the last committee, that I want us to think about, and then we'll build a case for it and you guys shoot it down. I don't know what to call it, but I'm calling it right now. What was I calling this? Oh, compliance. I know everybody loves that term, and collaboration. So through that group would be response. How do we talk to what's going on? How do we say, no, you're going to use one identity management system. You don't get to go do your own thing. No, everybody doesn't get their own general ledger system. And if they do, they have to then interface to a common GL so we can get common numbers to support your work. Because otherwise it's spitting in the wind a little bit. But so how do we communicate? Is it breakfast? Is it formal? Is it informal? Who leads that? Is it one board member that kind of owns making sure we're talking to the other CIOs? Is it all of them? Probably not. There's a boatload of them. But how do we not make them feel like they're left out? The smaller agencies, right? So
Yeah, Jeff, can I jump in on that one just quick? Sorry.
Go ahead, Gabe. Appreciate it.
You had posed the question to Secretary Piccioni whether she has regular interaction with CIOs. I think perhaps for this board, one way we could do it is perhaps less in a formal environment, but kick off some kind of social, you had mentioned a breakfast, social environment or less formal environment, and where it's just to get to know you with all the CIOs as a start, and then defer back to Secretary Piccioni on whatever her regular cadence is with CIOs.
Great point. And Gabe and Madam Secretary, 2 things, there's something to think about, and I'm not above stirring the pot. I'm well known for doing a bunch of it, is think about even changing the composition of the board. 11, by the way, Harvard and I think it was Berkeley, did a study several years ago that they published. The optimum number of board members to get the most function is 11. So we got 11 voting members. We're really perfect. So I'm proposing potentially to think about screwing that up. But should we think about it? Again, food for thought. We'll have this discussion. I want you to think through this. Should we consider adding a couple additional CIOs to the board, which we can change either the bylaws and/or we can look at getting the legislation changed. Anything can be done. But if we had the CIO from DOT as an example, if we had the CIO from HHS, they control big budgets, have big impacts, or DPI.
I would suggest DPI.
And DPI, right. I mean, whatever those are, is it 1 more, 4 more? But does that add value and give them having a quote seat at the table, let them recognize the significance, and then we're also communicating, hearing the same things going on.
If I may, again, another way to think about it is that the governor's office convenes a regular meeting of all general counsels from the different agencies, all legislative directors, all policy directors, so on and so forth. So the functional leads in each of the agencies already regularly get together.
Right.
And to the degree that all of the CIOs regularly get together, that is one form of coordination that is already taking place within sort of the cabinet area.
Right.
And I think the question for this group is simply, what is the connection with the broader group of CIOs? And whether there is sort of formal representation there, I would argue that's somewhat satisfied by having Secretary Piccioni on this board. And if for lack of anything other than what we already have, perhaps at least an introduction to everybody across the CIO world for the cabinet, so that they at least understand who's who, What's the role of this board, such that if we need to go do something with them in the future, at least some of those relationships have started to be formed.
Right. Appreciate it. Okay, I'll be the person in the room. This is something we will tackle over time. Recommendation. Nobody has to react because I'm not looking for feedback on this yet. This is a big pot stirrer. And we can talk about history, what the intent for the board was, and for the creation of the Secretary of IT and the state CIO. But we need to talk about reporting lines and levels of authority. And I'm not going to share the history right now, but it begs the question, should the state CIO, should all the CIOs report to the state CIO? Or a dual reporting line to the state CIO and their department head secretary? Should it be a direct line and a dotted line? We can all talk about matrix structures and organization. And where's the pros and cons of that? Which we all, having some type of either business or IT background, that's a conversation we need to have because the legislature has expectations over time how that should be addressed. We need to stay, as the leadership has changed, some, not all, have expectations, and we need to work on that.
One thing for background might be helpful for this group to know that there are a number of consolidated agencies in the cabinet that do report to the secretary, the CIO.
That's right.
So the DOT, DPS, DEQ, just to name a few of the big ones, but not any of the other council of state, non-cabinet. So the DPIs of the world, for instance, do not roll up.
Sure. So those are all, and they have political reasons why, right? That we would have to address. But that's something, again, I think, depending what is, as we go through that discussion and debate and solicit input from all of us and expertise and think through the pros and cons. What are the issues we create? What are the issues we eliminate? You know, it's almost a little bit of a SWOT analysis as we do that, right? Is that we lead credence to making a recommendation. We're not implementing anything. We have no authority to do that. But I think our voice with the right homework and detail will go a long way to advancing what we may suggest to increase efficiencies and operations and things. So that's a topic over the next year I see us trying to tackle a little bit, not getting overdone in it. So communicating with the departmental and agency CIOs. So Gabe, as you mentioned, I appreciate, because you're right, that stuff we need to learn and know, that those CIOs do meet collectively, I guess, as a group, and how do we then become educated on what they're trying to do, so we're not taking something off left field when all those agencies agreed but us, because we weren't aware, right? So how do we stay educated as well will be important. All right, so that's basically what I've got. The last thing is jumping around is, you've got in a binder that's in front of you. It's got the enabling legislation. Take a peek at it when you get a chance. You know, we're not going to read it now. We kind of covered the powers and duties and responsibilities, but they're in there. And we're going to need some way to, I'd like to have us think about how do we create a projectize. Is that a word? Can I create a new word? Those expected deliverables. Putting a time frame on them, assigning responsibility and tracking how they're getting done, who's doing how. So we don't get to December 12th and we've said, well, we only have to do it once, but who's writing it this weekend, right, over Christmas? And then again, if we're going to do things on more of a, say, quarterly basis to update and share. Because if we're only communicating that annual report once a year, we are basically, we're a nebulous organization that has no recognition or stroke. My personal vision is that over time and different chairs, that we carry the same stroke as the NCDOT board. We have that kind of juice and clout, and that people are listening and paying attention and saying, okay, the board, collective body has decided, and we know what they recommend we need to do. And that's where we gotta get to. And we're not anywhere close to that, I don't think. So it's got the bylaws. One of the things, Jonathan, that would be helpful, and I don't know if there may not be anything, but it would be good to review the bylaws. And is there anything, it's a classic, anything we're doing that's in violation of or not doing that we're supposed to do per the bylaws, as well as the enabling legislation. But part of that is, it's a classic, when you've all come out of Oregon, there's an org chart, that's the one that's in the book. And then there's the org chart, how you actually operate, right? Well, as one example, I chair a healthcare organization, a free clinic, and the bylaws, how we operate we are off the mark in so many instances. And normally you'd say, okay, we need to correct what we're not doing for the bylaws. But in this case, the bylaws are like 20 years old. They're completely out of date. So what we need to do is say, here's how we operate, and change the bylaws to accommodate what's working well. So the question would be, as we run into time to time, it would be helpful where we're not adhering to the bylaws, but we need to make a change to them rather than us change how we're operating. So we keep them updated and current. So that would be one thing that we need to do. The annual report, I would, probably the March meeting, since I won't be here, is we need somebody to own the annual report and get us updated on, and what are the things, because we've messaged this as priorities with a lot of input and data, but a little loose, right? We need to ensure, are those really the priorities the next 9 months or so? And those that we don't have, we need to adopt. And so the annual report almost needs to become, I hate to use the cliche, a living, breathing document, not a once a year. And that we keep, so it's accurate and updated, and that we can refer to it that, hey, are we staying on the mark of the 2 or 3 key priorities that we're messaging? Sarah?
Can I just add something real quick? The
Sure.
report exists in the binder. Please read it. You'll note that the main priorities are the same things that Secretary Petroni and Jeff Tart, the chair, has put forward today. So it's very similar, but to the extent possible, particularly because this is a long session budget, and in there is recurring money for cybersecurity and portal. To the extent that this board can help us push those ideas at the General Assembly in the relatively near future.
Real near.
Yeah, so I completely agree, and I'm happy, but my team and I staff the board, so to the extent that we can help make sure that the report is updated throughout the year, great, but in the short term, if you guys can talk about how you can best communicate with the General Assembly to get those messages there, I would.
And part of his background and guys that have interacted will be helpful. I mean, this is where, Mike, you will be helpful. We need to sit down with you in the budget office, what you're doing and priorities in these areas. Mr. Auditor, perhaps things in your category that will Lynn Creedon, because you're 2 areas that the legislature listens to. And we can then be potential guides in helping in that. The sooner we get to that, there's really 3 areas to get budgets approved, monies approved. We need to go back into the key committee that addresses us, which is IT. But generally, IT doesn't have a whole lot of clout in and of itself as a committee. We're going to need anything that has a budget request is going to have to clear finance. So spending time with the finance chairs of both chambers will be imperative. And the real decision, ultimate, they will make recommendations, IT and the finance will make recommendations to be included in the overall budget appropriation process. And so when they do that, we really need to be at the budget chair level. Because if your budget chair recognizes it, agrees with it, it'll go in. If they don't, they have literally the authority and the political ability to boot anything out they want. Regardless if there's a majority of the members that want it, believe it or not. It's just the way the system works.
If I might speak out of turn, you're dealing with.
No, turn. This is not supposed to be a diatribe, even though it's turned into that today. This is, chime in, and we'll get more to conversational, kind of like I said, framing, things we need to cover, but this needs to be a board. I just need to be facilitating, not talking the whole time.
I just want to, on your point there, and I'm the legislative director for DIT, do what Tina tells me to do. On that point that you had, we have our legislative priorities almost completely fleshed out with the individual numbers. We are, you'll like to hear, looking at some of the duplication around other agencies and seeing how we can simplify the cybersecurity ask and a few other asks. So that's still in the works of being fleshed out, but likely by the time of this next meeting, I think we would be ready to come to you all with some of our main budget asks and also some hurricane relief asks around broadband and whatnot that are going to be separate buckets. Would love in the meantime, before that, to share individually with you, of course, Mr. Chair, and then others, what we're looking at there and get your advice and input on those.
One thing where you have items that they're going to go, yeah, that's just, we always take care of that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are good. As strange as it sounds, you want those to be a little lower priority because they're going to have, you need to literally be able to prioritize your priorities, the top 2 or 3 things. Because it's like, if you come with 80 things, they're gonna say, what are the 3 things? And the group that comes with, I have one thing, almost always are gonna get the one thing versus the 80 are almost gonna get none of it. It's just human nature, but how they react. So that will be important. The timing of things, I mean, the budget process has a long way to go. There's 2 things that we need to think about strategically as a board. There's 2 ways to get appropriations. One is in the budget. As far, or through legislation, that there's a program we want legislation, but you can also bury stuff in the budget. Policy can go in the budget. So if there's policy that's driving something, we can be strategic in putting policy and burying it in the budget. And we need to think about that as a venue or a pathway.
Yeah, we'd love to talk with you. You know, here's our list and what's the recommendation you've got for, you know, maybe we should push for this here. Maybe we should push for this here. You were in the nuts and bolts of it for several years.
Well, one of the challenges we all are going to face, and Mr. Auditor is going to face this in his, and DIT, is the direct impact of Western North Carolina. You know, I've had people tell me, okay, well, we've got like $6 billion in the rainy day fund. They go, well, we'll go fix it. We got $9 billion, we believe, are going to be sent by the feds. So now we got $15 million. We're in great shape, except for the fact that the replacement, going back to past state, is a $60 million repair bill right now in Western North Carolina. So we've got about 10% or whatever of the bill that we need. And then you compound it by the fact that we are going to be impacted by the wildfires and the funds going to California. So those 2 events are going to mess with priorities and programs. So it's going to be a massive competition for very limited funds, discretionary, other than what's already approved and fixed. So helping us understand the budget. I don't know if was there anything else? There's one thing on the budget I wanted to go through if it's in there. I don't know if I left it in or not.
One second.
It's all right. No, never mind. I'll find it because we're past. What we need to do, to the extent, and I would love somebody that's willing to own it, this is a big ask for the board, is to understand the IT budget from DIT and all the components and where it's being asked. Because he who knows the numbers and the budget controls and sets the priorities. So that's where we can be a help if we understand, but we're going to have to digest that budget in some level of detail. Besides, we have a bottom line amount. Where is it being allocated? And how's it being recovered? How's it being, are there fees? Are there taxes? What's even the revenue source for those things? How do we communicate cyber? How do we compare to our peers as well in some of these areas? Will be real important. So there's things we can tap into. Another source of communications that would be great for somebody as an informal group is for our interaction. You're all gonna quit your jobs. You're gonna have to come to work here. Is that we create.
I can't pay you much.
Well, that's another good point we got to come back to is reimbursement for expenses. Don't let me forget that. which we are allowed to do. Meals and travel, your lunchbox at Chick-fil-A, not at Sullivan's.
They've gone up. You gotta start going back to McDonald's. I'm sorry.
That's it. But what I was saying is a group called National Council of State Legislatures. They're they're a bipartisan group. They will have, this is another source we need to tap into, where we can pull what's going on in AI in all the other states, what legislation's being filed, what's been passed. So we don't reinvent the wheel. And are there good ideas that we should be jumping around, tweaking to our needs and that are important to us? So that's another source that this board needs access to summary level information at that level than us. I pulled just AI. I'm weird. That's stuff I read on the weekends. I actually downloaded and pulled all the bills, a summary of all the AI and privacy bills that were filed last session in all 50 states. It's over 600 pieces of legislation. There's a lot of discussion about what goes on in these areas. And interesting enough, we virtually had nothing from our side. So we need to, get current and deal with those issues. And we need to, as a board, be driving that policy direction, not letting a staffer in Berger's office do that. If Phil's listening, I was just kidding, Phil. But
In the chat, Sheree Gibbons, the Chief Privacy Officer, shared a legislation tracker.
perfect. So those are the kinds of things I see this board sticking its nose in the middle of going forward. And there's work to do. And the last thing I will leave you with this morning is that I want this board to be inputting information and then make decisions that should be made at the board level. We're not an operational group. We're not reviewing project work plans per se. And we're here to make decisions that should be made at the board level, not day-to-day stuff. So we need to keep within, it's basically, we need to figure out how to stay in our lane, but it's a pretty wide freeway. We have a lot of stuff to do. And we're gonna have to figure out how to divvy it up and get stuff done, which is the main reason why monthly meetings, and we're gonna have work groups, help in the committees. Anything? So, go ahead, Sarah.
The last two documents in this binder, and for those of you who aren't here, we will get you an electronic copy. We'll get everybody an electronic copy. For those of you who are new to state government in particular, these documents will be super helpful. They are it's the highest level business architecture for the state. There's a diagram in here of how state government is organized. So when you hear Council of State versus Cabinet and you don't know what that means, there is information about that in here so that you guys can better understand. If you go to the last document in particular, it's a fold-out map that is all of the capabilities that the state has. So DIT put together, went through all the legislation, went through everybody's websites and interviewed people from the agencies to come up with what these are. There's an overlaying map for each of the agencies that show which agencies do which things, but at a super high level, this is what we do. And every single thing on here has some touch to technology. So just wanted to give this as a baseline, so particularly those of you who are new could understand just the breadth and depth of what it is that IT is across the state and why this group is so important.
The two last things with this. One is, if you will submit to Sarah your preference, because we're going to assign people to standing committees and think that they'll be might not officially when we get done, but they would be digital transformation, would be cybersecurity and privacy, would be AI, and would be compliance and collaboration. Those four, we're gonna need people. Those, you guys will meet at whatever frequency and locale, how you decide to do that. The cybersecurity committee has been pretty successful and meeting pretty much monthly. The digital transformation has done some really cool things and laid some direction and foundation. They're cheap because they have all the CIOs, so they're a really strong group to do that. The others, and then the last group I'd like you to submit, and this is going to be really strange, I'd like you to share with Sarah what work group you'd like to be on. And since we don't have any, you're going to define the work groups you think we should have, and then what you would like to work on in that. That'll give us a little bit of direction and guidance. And then the last administrative note, unless somebody tells me differently, our meeting times, fourth Friday, from 9 to 11. We're not going to go past 2 hours. And then what we're going to do is we look at things from here forward. I'm going to divide the agenda so everybody's, not everybody every meeting, but the agenda is going to be, you guys are going to kind of be covering the meetings. I will just make sure we're time boxing and staying on track, if that makes sense. So it's literally, it's your guys' meeting from here forward. This is just frame setting to know what we're doing. 2 hours max, presentation potentially, a little bit of an update by the standing committees or the work group committees, but most of this stuff's going to get done at that level, not here. Everybody comfortable? All right. Any further, any comments, anything any of the board members want to share? Hearing none, then we're adjourned.
No,
Can I just say one quick thing? Sorry.
There's a few other logistics.
Okay, go ahead then.
Just as an FYI for those of you that aren't employees of the state, when the travel reimbursement. Yeah, it's just, and we're going to give you the form of it, like by the next meeting, that you have to fill out. But if you're interested in getting reimbursed for travel here, unfortunately, you don't get lunch unless you've spent the night to travel here, and you can't spend the night unless you're at least 35 miles away from where you're stationed, okay? And it's, unfortunately, you don't just get your breakfast reimbursed. You get, I think, $10.10 for breakfast as a per diem, right? And that's only if you leave before 6 a.m. to get here. So, and then dinner would be included only if you got home after 8 p.m. And lunch is never included if it's same day travel. So, yeah, but and then I think it's 25 cents a mile for your card. So I think that's the way that works, yeah. You can also do a rental car and they would pay for that, but most people choose to do the 25 cents for cover gas, et cetera. The other thing I would just say as y'all are looking over the bylaws, the way they're structured and the way we have to operate is the statutes give us the authority and the bylaws sort of flesh that out. So when you're looking over and coming up with the ideas and things that y'all want to do, we have to make sure that we're keeping them in those bullet points of authorities of the board. And I think that you'll see that they're pretty broadly written also. So just keep that in mind. And that's it for me.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to applaud the enthusiasm and the new faces. I can't say enough about Madam Secretary. In the last meeting I was in with you over, I forget where we were, maybe in the Albemarle building. The idea, of taking the SH out of IT and the idea of fun, that can seem trivial, but I'm gonna let y'all know something.
Can we get bumper stickers made with that or t-shirts?
I've already been a few years with that and maybe hurt some feelings, but I think it's great. Opportunities in front of us. Transformation is the heart of everything that I try to do. That's why I got into information technology. We weren't, in my day, I was taking the IBM Selectric tubes off and putting compact accelerators on, changing people's lives. IT, unfortunately, sometimes can be seen as a commodity, right? It's a cost. Does it ever really deliver what we expect? That's why I think these shorter durations for time to market. A lot of what I look at right now, a couple of folks have commented on that big hole in the ground over there. That's going to be a game changer for North Carolina. Like it or not, the explosions do go off. But when that building is completed and we have an education campus that is going to house the three main components of education plus commerce, that's not trivial. And I'd like to see some significant deliverables prior to us moving into that building that are going to enable that building to function at its highest capacity. I don't think we're the only ones, right? right, that feel that way. I think there's some General Assembly members that are banking a lot on how those teams work together, and we're going to be a key part of that. So thank y'all.
Great. Other comment, Julie, you had some?
I wanted to point out, you had on a consent agenda approval of meeting
Oh,
minutes.
minutes, yeah.
But we actually, the board has always had a practice of not taking paper minutes, but using the video recording as the minutes. And that's posted to the Secretary of State website.
So those members, do we have a quorum of returning members? So again, all the minutes, we're not going to read them to you. They'll be posted each time. We'll put them as document shares. But those that are familiar and have seen, are there any objections to the past meeting minutes?
And just again, video minutes.
Yeah, in the video, but the minutes from the last meeting and stuff.
No objection.
So hearing none, then they're approved by consent. Anything else we've got that before we forget? Everybody online, any comments from anybody? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Dave. Dave. I just saw Vernon on there. He's a good guy.
Dave. Shall I come over to your place?
Yeah, they just said.
All right.